Hey fam, welcome to Big Brother and the Hodling Company, the podcast about music and Web3 and trying to fend off Big Brother. I'm McKeegan Voice. Today I spoke with Benjamin James, who is a journalist and builder focused on the on-chain music space. James is the founder of Ziggy Ziggy, a music brand that celebrates on-chain music culture, named after one Ziggy Stardust. He's also a writer for Billboard and a former artist and producer. We chatted about the incredible highs and lows of his music journey, about getting his eyes open to a flawed music industry, and finding hope in on-chain music culture and technology. Hope you'll enjoy the conversation. Here we go. Hey Ben, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. As always, to start these things, I always like to start at the beginning and just get a sense of who you are, where you're from, and when your relationship with music began.
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Ben. I'm Music Ben on Twitter.
Hmm.
I guess my relationship, like music has been like a huge part of my life for as long as I can remember. I guess going back, I was an artist, producer. I ran a small record label up in the UK, up in the north of the UK. I owned a little studio up there, so we would just write and record music. It was kind of like the SoundCloud days.
Hmm.
So we would just, I had the studio, and basically I ended up working with two vocalists who were absolutely incredible, like a brother and sister combination, who had amazing, like just amazing singers. So we would just put stuff out on SoundCloud like every week. We would just record stuff, put it out.
Hmm.
We would do remixes, like unofficial remixes of everybody on SoundCloud. We would do covers. We would put our own stuff out. Um, Ended up like building a little fan base. Um, and this was kind of like the hype machine era. So we would just like figure out how blogs worked, um, like figure out how to get on the hype machine and like kind of run that system up. So yeah, that's kind of like, I mean, I've been in music for like forever, but that was like when it really kicked off and started becoming a thing. And I thought maybe this could be like my life, my career.
Hmm.
At a certain point, that kind of like that SoundCloud snowball turned pretty big, and we started getting like we ended up basically doing a deal with Sony in the UK and distributing our music across UK and Europe, like going on tour. We licensed tracks to Ultra Records in the US. um, so yeah, went through that whole thing, and then eventually got like dropped by a major label as well. So
Hmm.
went through the whole big process. Yeah, I've been an artist, I've been a producer, I've been on the independent scene, I've been on the
Hmm.
major label side of things, and that kind of just laid the groundwork for everything that I think is happening now in Web3, and how I look at things from Web3, and why I think
Hmm.
it's so important for artists.
Yeah, I'm curious first, just to contextualize that, what was the name of the act, and approximately what years was this happening?
Yeah, so the band was called Mausi, Mausi, which is a weird German spelling. I can't remember why we came up with it, but it was just one of those things that you do not expecting anything, and then you just stick with it.
Hmm.
I'm guessing, what was it, like pretty much 10 years ago, I think, was when we first started putting stuff out. So
Okay.
I don't know, yeah, 2013. Then had like a run of like 5 years of that being like my kind of full-time career. Basically going from very small, just playing, small venues. So I mean, you'll know this based in the UK, but it won't make
Hmm.
any sense to anyone else. But small town called Newcastle in the north of England.
Hmm.
So we just, we would play small bars, we would like rent vans and tour across the UK. And just, yeah, for 5 years, building and building and building, and eventually turning into something bigger.
I guess what was the feeling, what was the sense when you were at, your highest point, when you were thinking about the future? And then if you could walk us forward like through, the emotional context of being dropped by a major label and having to look, again at the music industry and kind of what, would be next for you guys.
Yeah, so I mean, it really is like highs and lows that
Hmm.
you it's so hard to describe to someone that hasn't kind of been through it. But yeah, you'll have these insane high moments where you're Like we were on tour with like Charli XCX, and in the UK
Mm.
we were touring with Years and Years and Rudimental. Um, so you'd have these massive shows, and then you'd be recording music in studios that you only ever like dreamed of.
Mm.
Doing so, there's those massive high moments, uh, and then there's the lows of almost like the low part is realizing you're in a major label deal that you don't have very much control over. Um,
Mhm.
and like I say, this is, the highs of when you're in your early 20s and you get offered a record deal, you think that that's the pinnacle of what music is.
Right. Right.
You think like that's kind of the goal, or at least it was back then. So there's the high of thinking you've achieved that, and then there's the reality of
Hmm.
actually having to deal with this kind of giant major label system, which, like, to be clear, I have, no, uh, like, I still think major labels are incredible if you're the right sort of artist that needs huge distribution, huge marketing,
Mhm.
huge reach into like television and radio and all of these massive things. There's really nothing more powerful than a major label at the right point in your career. But
Mhm.
when you're a very sort of independent, early entrepreneurial kind of artist like we were, um, signing that deal and then being like not having a lot of control over like when you get to release your music. And like I said, coming from, we were in this SoundCloud culture where you would just like do a remix and then put it up the next day, or you would record a track in the studio and the next day you'd put it on SoundCloud and get an instant response. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, we need 3 months to prepare for this next single, and then we'll release it 3 months later, and we need to do all this. And it's just it's an adjustment that we hadn't been prepared for.
Mhm.
But still, we sort of adapted to it, and we ended up doing we signed a two single deal, and we did those two singles, which we thought for which we thought went really well. They were being played on Radio One, and that's another one of those huge highs where like your music is being played on the radio. Um, but yeah, at the end of those two singles, it was basically a case of the label had to decide whether or not to do the album with us,
Right.
um, which we had ready, which we were very excited to do. Like as an artist, one of your good dreams is like putting together an album. And I know we live in like a singles world now, but I still think a lot of artists like want to put out this defining album. So
For
we were like,
sure.
it's ready to go. And they just like sat on that decision for like a year.
Wow.
So it's just that we just couldn't, like, it wasn't that they effectively dropped us. It was just like they just wouldn't make a decision. So then
Mm.
you're just trapped in this like strange place where you can't really. It's very hard to do anything because you can't put that music out, but you can't
Mhm.
take it to another label. So you're just stuck in this position where you're just waiting. Uh,
Mm.
so it was kind of. Yeah, it's like like we were saying, it's like the highs of these amazing moments, and then the lows of like it's not low, it's just frustration, I think,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just realizing that you don't own the music that you thought that you owned, that you don't have control and you don't have ownership of it,
Right.
uh, which I think resonates probably with a lot of people in Web3.
Totally. Yeah. I think it feels like a relatively common tale for folks with whom Web3 resonates,
Yeah.
is the lack of ownership and control. Uh, particularly. I'm curious, I mean, so what ended up happening? Did you just say goodbye to them? Like, we're not gonna wait around any longer? Did you ever make the album on your own
No,
terms?
I think that's the weirdest thing. We never made the album. I think it still exists as like demos somewhere, but
Hmm.
through that process, just as an artist, really grinds you down. So we kind of just lost a lot of love for it and for the
Mhm.
process.
Mhm.
We also ran out of money, which also like
Hmm.
doesn't help. So um, yeah, that kind of just it sort of just fizzled out, and we eventually, I think we were able to get the ownership back of those tracks, apart from the two singles that we still don't have any ownership over those.
Mhm.
Um, but we did eventually like get the album back. But by which point, you've lost momentum. You've like,
Right.
which is just the most important thing for any artist is just like consistency, momentum, building and building and building. And then for that just to stop for a year and you don't put any music out, it's very hard for I think you can get away with it when you're a superstar, but as a upcoming musician,
Right.
that's where like momentum is what carries you.
Yeah.
So yeah, we lost. Yeah, it was a combination of things. We lost the momentum. We kind of lost the love for it, and we we ran out of money. So it's like, let's figure out what's next instead.
Fair. I'm curious if you've ever, if you've considered revisiting the album within like this new, this new Web3 ecosystem. Like, have you spoken with your original two bandmates about any of this? Is that something that, piques your interest at all?
Yeah, it comes up sometimes. So and like the one of the singers is still my co-founder at Ziggy at
Mm,
the moment. So we're still really close, and we still make music together sometimes. But it's now just it's now just a lot more fun. So it's like it's no longer our job and our like the only reason like you're doing anything is to live off it. It's now just enjoyment. So I don't know. We haven't actually talked about going back to those tracks. I think we just sort of forgot about them, but that might be interesting to be honest.
yeah. I mean, I'm interested in listening to them. You'll have one listener at least.
Well, maybe we'll do it. We'll into one on one.
Yeah. Um, well, yeah. I mean, speaking of Web3, so you're at this moment where you kind of have to do some soul searching with your relationship with, I guess, probably your own music. I mean, obviously your own music, but also probably with the industry at large, and just kind of reconsidering the way in which it works and its inner machinations. What was the bridge from there to intrigue with Web3?
Yeah. So I think one of the things is when I was originally making music and releasing music, it felt like there was a really clear path to how you could like not necessarily break an artist, but how you could almost how you could be sustainable as a musician. Like you could the path was, you put music out on SoundCloud, you could find the right blogs to cover you, you could build a fan base through early versions of social media. You could tour or kind of profitably, at least in the UK. And it felt like there was a clear path to being sustainable as a musician. Sort of 5 years later, when we were like rethinking like what we were going to do, like we've been dropped by a label, and there
Hmm.
no longer seemed to be that obvious that same obvious path. It was kind of like Spotify was really dominant in terms of
Hmm.
like editorial playlists and like algorithmic playlists. It's a lot harder to figure out how you break that. And then, TikTok and Instagram were sort of becoming the main musical forces and couldn't really figure out the way to break through that either. And I still speak to people in the music industry now that are like, we don't know how a song breaks on TikTok, like something you just get sort of lucky.
Hmm.
So I think for a good few years, I was always looking to be like, what's the path back into music? But I couldn't see it
Mm,
until Web3 kind of came. And I've been working in and out of crypto for the last 4 years. So I've sort of had my eye on it. But when I saw music breaking through like, like catalog and then Sound XYZ becoming more of a thing, I started to see a sort of a pathway again, where it's like you can have this very small community of fans that build around you from a very early stage,
mhm,
that I think had been kind of lost for like the last 5 years. So
mhm,
um, that was the really intriguing thing for me was finally seeing a small culture growing around independent music again that felt very like SoundCloud era,
mhm,
where artists are just like collaborating with each other, they're remixing things, they're putting it out overnight. Obviously, they're making money as well. Like the money thing is all like kind of a huge thing as well.
right.
But it was more this like scene culture that was developing. And I was like, I've seen this before, and I understand where that goes, and I understand how exciting that is for musical trends generally. So that was what really pulled me down deeper into the rabbit hole of Web3.
Right. No, I agree. I mean, I think that is a really exciting component of what is being built for the first time, to have this sort of proof of identity that you can really rally a community around. I think feels reminiscent to like a SoundCloud era, but like has this sort of additional element to it of like provenance, like this sort of cross-platform, capabilities, which is really interesting.
Yeah. I think the provenance part is actually it gets talked about so much on the art side of NFTs, but I think it's also massive for music that has just not
Hmm.
been explored. There's never like the issue of provenance has always been an important part of art culture generally, like where the paintings and where the artist originated from. That has never really existed in music, but all of a sudden you can mark exactly when something was minted on chain, what moment it captures, and what moment the fans came in and
Hmm.
were a part of that. So it's like it really is for the first time who was there at the very beginning of your journey. And again, I think back to comparisons of the early SoundCloud days, and I remember Lord putting Royal on SoundCloud, like not the
Hmm.
moment it happened, but I remember it being there pretty early, and I remember The Weeknd doing his like completely anonymous first three mixtapes, and those are like incredibly important parts of music culture that will probably just disappear
Hmm.
once like data centers get updated and stuff, and it's really boring stuff like that. But had that been minted on Ethereum, that would exist forever. And the first people that maybe could have collected that like weekend mixtape is like I feel like that's kind of crazy. And it's not financial based at all. It's just I really think of NFTs more like I'm more and more starting to think of it of like I was there or an event, but like NFTs are like marking an event based thing, I think.
Hmm.
Still kind of figuring that out, but that's what's kind of really magical for me that hasn't been done with music before.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it feels like a cultural artifact, and like, this ability to archive music, in a really novel way, that really hasn't existed on the internet before, and is always at risk, as you said, like, updating data centers or whatever, a platform just kind of disappearing from the internet and taking, all of its information with it. It almost feels like I was having a conversation with somebody the other day around like it's almost like we're able to treat music more as like merchandise to a certain extent, because to your point, it's like, proof that you were there for an important cultural moment. Like, I don't know, going back and like you were at the show where Madonna, sold her first, whatever T-shirt, and you still have that and you wear that. Um, and that's not really about the money either. A T-shirt is probably worth a lot of money, but it's more of a commentary on like your identity and your presence, in a certain place. And there's been like this really interesting tension between, especially within Web3, with like, the financialization that is inherent to crypto and that being applied to music. And I'm curious to get your thoughts to like that sort of tension between those two things and where that lies and how we can better promote things like how we can better promote on-chain music as this cultural artifact, as this like proof of being there, instead of like really over-indexing on the financialization, which I see, as part of the narrative.
Yeah, it's a really huge thing. I think one of the reasons for it is because often we spend so much time arguing about like what is an NFT.
Hmm.
And the fact is like an NFT is literally just, a wrapper. It can be anything that you want. So it can just be this sort of it can be this small memento of a particular moment in time that means something to you means, a lot to one person, but maybe not to somebody else. Or it can be tokenizing a song in a very scarce edition format that has the potential to rise in value, and it's that and it's everything in between. So which is where I think like so much of the like clash comes, because some people think that it's an investment format that I can be early to this track that might be huge in the future, that I know I might make some money for it, and for somebody else it's just like I just want to collect this cool thing. And
Hmm.
I think all of those worlds will exist. Part of me is excited about the financialization aspect because music has never had that. Music has always been the value of music has always been capped,
Hmm.
by Spotify at 9.99 a month, or
Right.
at
Right.
99 cents a song by Apple, or like the production cost of a CD. Like all of the music has always been like productized and then market like priced for mass consumption. So I
Hmm.
am excited about the financial aspect because for the first time ever, it can be like, let's take the cap off that, and maybe this song is worth like $10,000 to a certain person
Hmm.
or to a to a certain group of collectors, especially if I'm there early enough to understand that cultural relevance of that moment. So like, I'm not averse to the financial aspect financial aspect of it, but it is dangerous uh, if that's the only narrative in music. So I
Right.
think that's, yeah, part of me is excited because it does unlock this whole new thing that's never existed before,
Hmm.
where it does allow us to maybe figure out what the real value of music is, because it's different to different
Mm.
people based on different tracks and different emotions. But I don't think that scales to like a mainstream audience, like your average music fan. I don't think. But and I also think it might be a bit like detrimental to the artist if they're constantly thinking of their music as an investment, and
Right.
whether they should be appeasing their collectors as investors or whether they should just be making good music, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I kind of like it if I think about it like artwork, where the vast majority of collectors like collect a piece of artwork because they love it, but maybe there's a certain part of them that thinks this could be more culturally relevant, more important, more valuable in the future. So I like it thinking of it more like art than thinking of it like buying a stock in Facebook or something, right? Where
Mm.
that's a
Hmm.
very obvious like financial. I'm only buying Facebook stock because I think it will be worth more in the future.
Right.
But with art, it's like I'm buying the art because I love it and I want to put it on my wall and it means something to me and it tells the world about something about me. It's like my identity, and it can be more valuable in the future. So that's the sweet spot where I think music NFTs could work,
Hmm.
but it can't be like I'm buying this because I'm investing purely in the artist. Like I think that's just a bit too much of a narrative that won't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, that's kind of a long-winded answer.
No, no worries. I mean, I mean, if we had the answer to that, we'd be we'd be able to solve a lot of issues.
True.
Uh, um, yeah, I agree, and it sort of feels like there's like a very subtle difference, sort of at the individual level, of like what is your intention. It's because like there is a financial element to like most of the things that we purchase. Like even thinking about art is like when I buy a piece of art, I'm not thinking primarily about what is the return going to be on this in like 30 years,
Yeah.
but it's like it's at the periphery. It's like this is a piece of art. There's only one of these and it could accrue value over time, but I'm getting it for to hang on my wall. And like
Yeah.
when people come into the door, they connect me with this thing. Um, so I guess it's sort of like, it's really difficult to look at that behavior and understand how to cultivate it, because it is really subtle and it is very nuanced. I mean, I totally agree with you in terms of like it doesn't make any sense for Spotify, for instance, to cap what people are willing to spend on music or treat all behavior as the exact same value. If you spend 1 hour on Spotify per month, you pay the same as if you spend 3,000 hours
Yeah.
on Spotify. I mean, I see a lot of opportunity for more like more like experimental music, um, which doesn't necessarily cater to a mainstream audience and therefore doesn't really work on places like Spotify,
Mhm.
but attracts like niche audiences in which these people might value this a lot more than that, kind of average 9.99 a month sort of rate.
Yeah, I've often thought that maybe the sort of not the breakout, but maybe the most successful artists in NFTs would be more experimental or on the kind of like I don't think it'll be a mainstream artist. Like I would always see it more of like a quartet or like
Mm.
an early quartet before, he's playing Coachella. But
Hmm.
where you have this diehard group of like true music geeks that will spend money on like expensive vinyl and will like, you know, spend a lot of money on like high end hardware to listen to, and like I kind of feel like that's maybe where you would get somebody who's like this music is what is should be valued at a certain level more than this artist is going to break the Billboard chart, so let's buy an NFT because I think it'll be worth more. I
Mhm.
kind of see that's where the artistic value could be in music. So you know, an artist that is more experimental wouldn't run up like millions and millions of streams on Spotify, but a
Mhm.
small group of people might value that really highly as like incredible experimental artwork, or I know there's loads of examples um, of artists like that.
Yeah, I mean, given that, I mean, I agree with you, and I guess given that, what do you think the roles are of like the major legacy, platforms, the major labels? This is something that you write about quite a bit. Is like, for instance, the attempts that Spotify has made to explore Web3, to bridge into Web3, by working with these really big Web3 sort of brands that aren't really reflective of like this. I keep calling it like a sublime weirdness of Web3 music culture. uh,
That's a great way to put it.
and I'm curious, like, given like, is there a bridge that can be compatible for a place like Spotify to work their way into this culture, or is it always going to feel extractive?
No, I think there's like a really good way that they could do it actually. If they thought of NFTs as like capturing moments in time or capturing early audience or early fans, then the best way that Spotify could be involved in Web3 is to like not think of it financially at all, like point blank, like not selling NFTs, not trading NFTs,
Hmm.
but just giving listeners like what I would call like a fan badge, an NFT fan badge. If that at the end of every year, Spotify has its like Spotify Wrapped
Hmm.
um, feature, and if you're the top 0.1% of listeners of a particular artist, you should get a particular NFT reward or a fan badge to say that you are one of the biggest listeners. And it can be as simple as that, just like literally just a badge that people can display. Or maybe if you are one of the first 50,000 listeners of a new track,
Hmm.
you're an NFT, you get an NFT badge that just like confirms that you were there early and one of the early listeners. And then
Hmm.
that doesn't have to be financialized. People would put that all over their Instagram. People would put that like everywhere. Like the amount of
Hmm.
how much people share their Spotify Wrap at the end of the year. That's like
Hmm.
not even that's just a Web2 marketing gimmick. But imagine if you
Right.
actually had something that you felt like you had ownership of. Um, I feel like that would be really, really powerful. And then in the future, that can unlock rewards if Spotify ever allowed themselves to open up and be a bit more permissionless.
Hmm.
If you're in the top 0.1% of Fortet's listeners, maybe you can get access to a token gated exclusive content or something. And this is like the whole, I'm still not convinced that like utility like in that kind of way is valuable, but for Spotify that kind of makes sense rather than selling NFTs.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would encourage them to think of it just like as capturing moments in time, rewarding early listenership, um, and not just trying to jump on board with big NFT projects. I think that's never been a winning strategy for NFTs. Full stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. That's a really good use case for them, and also has like potential ramifications for the artists as well, who gain this like new visibility into who who's actually in the other side in Spotify, rather than just seeing like, oh, I have 8,000 monthly listeners, whatever
Yeah,
that
exactly.
means.
Yeah, I mean, I know that that's a dream world scenario. Like
Hmm.
imagining that Spotify would give artists that much control and insight.
Hmm.
But I just think that's something that would be cool.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Here's hoping. And I just want to take a step back into your, you mentioned earlier that you uh, have been in crypto for, for about 4 years at this point. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about uh, what you've done in your experience, over these past, few years.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it was kind of at the tail end of when I was doing music, just sort of looking for other ways to kind of sustain myself, really, and ended up just falling into freelance writing, which is just as well as doing music. I've been writing my whole life.
Hmm.
That just seemed like an easy thing to try and do at the same time. Eventually fell into writing for crypto companies. Uh, so I kind of worked with one of the early like block explorers, which was like how you would track Bitcoin transactions in 2018. We would do some early like research and put out things there. Ended up writing, ghostwriting two Bitcoin books.
Cool.
So there are a couple of books on Amazon about Bitcoin that I wrote under like
Nice.
different people's names. So just kind of bouncing around different projects, learning as much as I can. Uh, yeah, very like Bitcoin centric, which still is one of the most important things I think has ever been invented, and that still makes me skeptical of so much of the crypto world.
Hmm.
Is how powerful and how important just how important Bitcoin is.
Hmm.
But yeah, I just ended up bouncing back and forth doing all sorts of things, and then when music NFTs clearly were going to become a thing, and like I think that's probably like 2021, and I discovered catalog and kind of got lost in everything that was going on at catalog.
Hmm.
I basically just dropped everything because I was like, this is taps into music that was my life for so long, and it
Hmm.
taps into crypto that I've been involved in, and I was like, this has to be, it's kind of like too perfect. So I just dropped everything and figured out how I could try and be valuable to the space and try and like figure out a way in, I guess.
Cool. For the last bit, you've been running Ziggy Ziggy Music, and I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, what that project is, how it started, what the vision is.
It kind of came in out, it kind of came around of me trying to figure out what I really wanted to do in the Web3 music space.
Hmm.
And it kind of seemed to me like the thing that was missing um, was a brand or maybe media, but was something that was it was missing something that focused on artists and artist stories and the culture around music. Everything around the Web3 music space is very based on like data or sales or like tech platforms or strategies or all of these things which are amazing because
Hmm.
we're still figuring out what this world is and having conversations around that, which is great. But I kind of thought this is not going to appeal to other people unless we're like telling artist stories. So it's kind of like, where is the pitchfork of Web3, or like where is the like the cool brand like that 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 showcases what artists are doing. Um,
Right.
and this was I was completely um, like I was doing it as well, and I remember I wrote an article for Billboard, and at one point the editor left me a note, and they were like, I can't remember who I was writing about, but it was like 1,000 word story, and the
Hmm.
editor left me a note. It was like, what kind of music do they make?
Hmm.
Like I realized I'd written an entire story about Web3 and artists, and I like hadn't mentioned the music, and I was like, that's insane.
Yeah.
So I know that it's like I've done it as well. I'm guilty of it. We focus so much on the technology side and the sales side in this new world, but it's like the thing that I'm most excited about is this whole culture that's developing, this like collaborative culture, these like collectives that are coming up, and that's the side that I think will resonate with people more in the future. Uh, so yeah, Ziggy Z was basically started as a brand to focus completely on the artist story. So
Hmm.
launched it in January. Um, like really simply, just I thought, oh, what I'll do is just find the best like music NFT of the day, I'll make a little video and put it out on Twitter. So every day we post, yeah, our favorite music that we found on Web3. We link to the Mint site, and then over time it's sort of developed, and we'll now post, anything cool that's happening around the artists in Web3. So we're eventually becoming a platform or a place to just boost what's happening with Web3 music artists,
Mm-hmm.
to really like shine a light on the entire culture that's happening,
Mm-hmm.
rather than, we don't post stuff about sales really, at least not on Twitter. We don't post anything about sales or tech or anything like that. It's just like, what cool stuff are the artists in this scene doing? Because I mean, I always just look back, and every big music trend came out of kind of an independent scene of passionate artists doing cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, that's kind of what I see happening here. So let's document that side of it.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of where it came out of, and it's sort of growing. I'm not really sure where yet. I'm literally like building it, I guess, in public, figuring it out as I go along.
Yeah. No, cool. I think that's a really, really important initiative and a really important vision. Really, really important vision. I've sort of had that frustration quite a few times in Web3 music of just reading something and it was like, why? Like literally nothing is about the music. I have no idea what is happening, sonically. And
Yeah,
as a music journalist who like was covering scenes for a long time, it was rooted like entirely around the music, the style of music, and the people that gathered around it. It didn't really make any sense to me. But now it's sort of almost, it feels like sometimes that Web3 kind of is the genre. Like it's the connective thread between all of these different types of musicians. It's what brings them together into like Twitter spaces and Telegram groups. And it's sort of like transcended the idea of like what a genre is. I'm curious to, your thoughts if you've, I don't know, had thoughts like that before.
100%. And I so often see people saying like Web3 is the tools, or Web3 is just like platform, and it's like, I actually think I do think it's more than that. I think,
Mm,
in the same way that like crypto art is its own movement, its own culture,
mhm,
that is separate from traditional art galleries, that's separate from anything else that's happening. And I do think the same thing is starting to happen in music. And you've got this culture of, there's artists like Violetta Zeroni and like Sami Arriaga that just spend their entire lives on um, Twitter Spaces and building community. And even though they're like distinct in terms of genre, that's a movement that I've never seen before in music. And I think
mhm,
that's a culture that is like nascent to this space and this space only. And like,
mhm.
Violetta doesn't have any music on Spotify now. She's purely like a Web3 musician. And that isn't just a tool, that is culture. And
Yep.
then I see the same thing, you've got Daniel Allen and Rio Cragen committing themselves to Web3, and the sound that they're making in the collective. They wouldn't have come together if it wasn't for Web3. So
Right.
that's a culture that is born from this technology. So yeah, I think a lot of people just think of it as a tool, which it is, but tools create scenes, and in the same way that SoundCloud created an entire culture of music.
Right.
And I think this a similar thing is starting to happen now.
Right. It'll be interesting to see, like, as the space matures and hopefully, grows, if something similar to like what happened with SoundCloud does happen, because SoundCloud did have some early scenes that happened to be in specific genres, and then like everybody was using SoundCloud. So then it wasn't a scene connected by SoundCloud; it was just another platform to put music on, and it was made distinct, or you were then able to differentiate by more traditional genre types. Do you think that'll happen in this space as well?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so what seems to happen in my eyes is that small scenes develop in certain places, like SoundCloud, or wherever. That becomes such a big cultural force that the music industry at large takes notice of it,
Hmm.
amplifies it, and then it becomes a huge thing. And then that's where they take kind of all of their cues from. So it's like that happened on SoundCloud, and then that became such a big culture that the music industry grabbed it and amplified it and made it this big thing.
Right.
Then it happened, like there was a certain point when I was coming up where Shazam was this huge thing, and all of the metrics, for the music industry relied on how many people were Shazamming, which essentially meant like how many people were playing it in clubs and hearing it,
Mhm.
wherever. And it's like then the music industry spotlight moved to that, and that's what like built up the next group of artists. And now the spotlight is kind of like on TikTok, so new artists are emerging on TikTok and those trends, and the legacy music industry sees that and amplifies it and makes it bigger. And I think eventually there'll be such a like kind of groundswell of exciting culture happening in Web3 that
Mhm.
that's where the music industry will then shift, because we'll start having artists that break out, like maybe Violetta, who's like, I'm not putting music on Spotify.
Mhm.
So you can only get it in Web3. So then all the culture revolves, like, gets really close around that. More and more artists start coming in, more like, and then the metrics become the legacy music industry will start looking at, be like, well, how many community members have you got? How many mints did you get on the last song? And then these things become more and more relevant and bigger and bigger. And then
Mhm.
there'll be something else, but I don't really see what else there is. There's always a new tech development where a new scene of music kind of blossoms and then gets picked
Mhm.
up on. And I don't know what else that is apart from Web3. I mean, like the only other thing is AI,
Right.
but I see that as more like a creative tool. I don't see that like becoming like a scene, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It does seem to be the bit that has the most potential, I guess. And it also, I think, like a lot of, tech-driven movements, there's a lot of promise and a lot of potential to disrupt this really huge paradigm that is the music industry, that has really been able to sort of trample every type of tech and just make it work in its own image.
Yeah.
uh and I guess that's my concern as well, coming back to that culture, that, like, sublime weirdness of Web3. Like, part of the magic is just like people showing up and like being in these very intimate settings. um but there are a couple things happening, like with open editions, and like a slow embrace of some of the same sort of metrics that are being used in Web 2. And I guess I have concern that, are we entering another race to the bottom, which is going to, like, maybe people will enter the space, but are we going to have the same issues and like this huge bottleneck at the point of discovery, and like just way too much music that you need to control it with some type of an algorithm, and it's just we end up creating basically the same thing. I mean, that's my
Yeah.
concern. I'm curious if that's, you share it.
Yeah, I do worry about the same kind of thing. And I think it's worth taking a step back and like figuring out what this technology should be used for or can be used for that's different to what exists. Like, while I'm excited that it's like a new version of SoundCloud culture, if
Hmm.
we just recreate SoundCloud on a blockchain, that's like that doesn't help. That's
Right.
we haven't moved the needle forward.
Right.
Um, I still think like the thing that like to me that blockchain actually really does unlock is digital scarcity. Whether we kind
Mm.
of like that or not, that's a true like 0 to 1 innovation that we haven't had before.
Mm.
And so if the model becomes open editions at very low prices,
Hmm.
part of me just thinks I'm not sure what that's achieved.
Right.
Um, Whereas the ability to be able to have limited edition drops, we've never done that around music. It's always been like streetwear has had that or
Right.
artwork has had that. But music has always been like infinite and abundant,
Mm.
whether it's on the radio, it just comes to you, or Spotify, it's just infinite music.
Hmm.
To suddenly be able to say there are only 100 collector's editions of this digitally, that that has never existed before. So I do think that the breakout kind of model is will maybe be around scarcity.
Hmm.
And then the other kind of breakthrough is the relationship that it creates that you've never had between fans before. And I'm still a little bit skeptical of that because it just seems like a buzzword to say like deep fan relationship. And it's
Right.
like, what does that mean?
Hmm.
But at least at this point in time, being able to have like a close Telegram group with artists that you like or getting special access to something is something that hasn't existed before. So I think I'm always excited for people experimenting and trying new things because we don't know what the future of this looks like.
Hmm.
But I do think I'm trying to like tap into the two or three things that blockchain actually really does unlock that hasn't existed before, and I think we should kind of focus there.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Like if it just becomes like how many mints do you get?
Hmm.
That's just the widget. That's the same as like that's just how many streams have you got, but it's just
Streams.
a
Yeah.
different. It's a different. It's the same metric. It's just a different word.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good point to end there. This is major. Let's see.
Yeah, it's just impossible to predict, right? Like I couldn't tell you 3 months ago what the music NFT space would look like
Hmm.
now. So trying to like predict is so hard.
Yeah, things change very quickly in this space, which is exciting and tough to keep up with. But there are some exciting things happening and interesting experiments being done. Like you mentioned, Violetta, and like we're sort of circling back to how we started the conversation, taking more control and more ownership over music, and that's being enabled by this technology in a slightly different way than it has existed in the past, which is exciting.
Yeah, I do think she's a standout kind of example because she's truly existing without Spotify, without legacy. I mean, she's the kind of true example of like 1,000 true fans or whatever, and
Right.
she's done that through her editions are very scarce. Like she doesn't have any open editions, as far as I know. It's like her original collection, a secondary collection, and then a very few songs maybe released through sound. But it is like this is the collection. How do I add value to the people that own that collection? And so it's kind of taking care of this small community of 1,000 people rather than trying to reach 1 million or 2 million, 3 million people. So
Yeah.
that's really disruptive to me. That's like
Hmm.
completely different. And it's also a really hard decision for an artist to make because a lot of artists just like, I want to reach a lot of people. I want to play main stage Glastonbury. I want to be like, you want to reach a lot of people. So the decision to be like, no, we're going to have scarce editions. I'm going to take care of this community that really supports me and loves the music. That's a really like bold, disruptive decision to make in the music industry. I think so. I think she's really cool.
And I mean, it also makes a lot of sense when you think of just like human communities, like thinking hyper locally, even though we're using like global technology. But when you think about like true bonds, they require time and attention, and you can't give that to 3 million people. So if you can create that really tight knit community and think more locally, I mean it makes sense. I've always thought like the thousand true fans theory or whatever. It makes a lot of sense. It's just the platforms that are designed to to ostensibly help artists get there aren't really built around that.
No, I mean, all tech companies usually are built around the idea of scale
Right.
because of the incentives of investors and whatever
Hmm.
else. So you always need more users, more metrics.
Yeah.
So it's very hard for a platform to to help you build those 1,000 true fans because you're effectively capping what the audience is. So it's a
Yeah.
really tricky kind of balance to strike.
It is. Yeah. It's sort of. It seems like it might take a platform to exit uh the like the VC machine, in
Yeah,
the same way that Violetta is exiting this
yeah.
the streaming paradigm, and it's you just have to take yourself out of the hamster wheel in order to build a new wheel. I
Yeah, it's true.
don't know.
Yeah, it's true.
um But yeah, again, let's see. Let's see what happens. I just have one more question for you that I ask everyone at the end of the show. This is unrelated to this, but you go to Desert Island. You get to bring 3 albums with you. What are they?
God, man, that's such a good question. Okay, I need to think about this.
And I put you on the spot.
I'm probably taking In Rainbows.
Nice, good
Radiohead.
choice.
I'm probably taking. There's an album called Felt by Niels Fram.
I love
It's
that
like
album.
it's just piano music, but it's like he put like layers of felt inside his piano to soften, to dampen the keys, so that he didn't disturb his neighbors. But the album is just the most beautiful, incredible album. So I feel like if I'm on a desert island, I might need some just calm music. So
Yeah,
I'd do
a
that
little bit
one.
of tenderness.
Yeah. And I'd take a David Bowie album. I'm just trying to think which one I would take. Probably Ziggy Stardust.
It makes sense.
Hence
It
why
feels
I bought
thematic.
Ziggy. But yeah, so I think those
Oh,
three.
nice. I approve of those 3. Great choices. I would be very happy on an island with those 3 records.
Nice.
Awesome, Ben. Really enjoyed our conversation. For those listening who are interested in getting involved or following along with what you do, what's the best place for them to do that?
Just on Twitter. So I'm at musicben_eth on Twitter, or at Ziggy Ziggy Music. Either of those two, you can find me. My DMs are open, so that works.
Cool. All right, go check out the work that he's doing. Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for being here. I really enjoyed it, and be well.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. It's been great.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode of Big Brother and the Hodling Company. I'm your host, McKeegan Voice, and you can keep up with me and all the latest Web3 music trends on Twitter at McKeegan. That's MACEAGON. This show is a production of Decential Media, and you can visit us at decential.io. And remember, only you can prevent and fend off Big Brother.